Can I avoid accidentally putting holes in this antique leather book with this? And is it okay for me to put new holes in it with this? Hi there, I'm Mark and welcome back to the bindery for part 2 of the, let's face it, very necessary restoration work I'm doing for Manchester Oratory on their complete works of St Bernard from 1839. A very lovely antique set, but as you can see, it has seen better days. If you haven't seen part 1, where I re-sew these silk end bands by hand, follow the link to that and watch that video first. But with the end bands complete, I can move on to making everything ready to reattach these boards. The piece of white linen I'm gluing up here has many names in bookbinding. Fraynot, or Super, or Scrim. No, I'm not making that last one up. But whatever it's called, this will form the cloth hinge holding the boards onto the book. To make it even stronger, I'm going to sew this cloth onto the book as well as gluing it. For this I need my trusty awl, with which I make the pilot holes in the shoulder of the book at a 45-degree angle. The problem is, the awl is quite thick and I don't want to punch whopping great holes in the book, so I switched to a thinner sewing needle. Of course, that comes with its own problems. The text block is quite dense, so I need to push it through the bone folder, and that has cost me needles in the past. Now, as with all things to do with conservation of pretty much anything, I would think, there are pros and cons to any technique you're going to choose, and the cons may often skirt controversy. The pros to doing this version of joint tacketing are it's incredibly strong. The boards are not going to detach anytime soon thanks to this sturdy cloth hinge. And again, you won't see any of this in the finished book. The reservations some bookbinders are going to have about using this technique are to do with making new holes, as I've just done, in an otherwise sound text block, and a kind of philosophical objection, I suppose, in that this is a 20th century fix for a 19th century book. They wouldn't have done this in the 1830s. When this book was published. And I'm kind of sympathetic to that, as was Bernard Middleton, the great Bernard Middleton, for those of you not familiar, a name to conjure with in bookbinding circles, left us great texts about very detailed, aspects of bookbinding, and it's one of his books that I've consulted about doing this kind of work. And he was very sensitive to keeping an original binding, making sure that things were era appropriate. And this was his preferred technique. And having looked at the other techniques as well, because of the structure of this text block, none of the others would have worked. So I was somewhat backed into a corner in choosing this one. I mean, what would you want a bookbinder to do if this was your book from the 1830s? Is it more important for it to look right, or for it to be structurally a sound book again? There are no right answers, I don't think. It's entirely up to you. Let me know in the comments, but I'd be interested to know what you think. The tacket sewing is tied off and trimmed, and the spine is lined with craft paper. So I can now replace the hollow I cut off in the last video with a straightforward 1 on 2 off structure. That is 1 layer of paper on the backbone of the text block, and then 2 layers glued together to form the outer of the tube. You can see how it all works when I open the text block. The end bands flex wonderfully and the hollow opens. The text block is now ready. So it's time to tackle those 2 common problems with Victorian bookbinding I mentioned at the start. The problem with books this age, from the early 19th century, is that they pared the leather way too thin. What that has meant is that with wear and tear, opening and closing a book like it's supposed to be opened and closed, eventually it splits along this joint between the board and the spine. That then means eventually the boards become detached and the spine falls off. Makes for a lot of nice work for us bookbinders 200 years later, but I can't repeat the same mistakes. So to combat that, I'm going to be using unpaired full thickness leather to go over this joint between spine and board, and we'll come to that in the next video. But for now, I need to fix the other problem. See how the board sits right up against this ridge, the shoulder, of the book. That squeezes the leather when you open the book, eventually causing failure. To combat that, I'm trimming the boards at the spine edge so there's a gap, a groove, between the boards and the shoulder, which relieves that stress on the leather because it has more freedom when opening. Now here's where it could all go horribly wrong. It's standard practice to hide the new leather underneath the old to keep the character of the original binding. But remember, this leather is paired excessively thin, so one slip with my very sharp lifting knife and I'll cut through it, doing irreparable and visible damage to an antique book. I've also got to lift nearly this whole strip up to the first debossed line. When the new leather is under it, where it stops is disguised by that existing line, so there's no unsightly ridge of new leather hiding under the old. Again, this repair has to be as invisible as possible. You've probably also spotted that I've left a strip of original leather along the spine edge. When I stick the lifted leather back down over the new, its edge, the old leather's edge, is tucked in rather than just lying down on top of the new leather. That makes the board nice and level and prevents it from catching on fingers and thumbs when handling the book. It's best to go slowly, with confident movements, and remember to breathe every now and then. I'm not going to lie, I am very relieved that this went as well as it did. I could have made a whole new bunch of problems for me to deal with, on top of the ones I was already trying to sort out. And I do appreciate that this is kind of like the awkward middle film in a trilogy. You know, it looks like not a lot has happened. We're in pretty much the same place now as we were at the start. You know, the boards are still detached. There's still no spine on the book, etc. But it is a really important step in the process. So thank you for sticking with me through it. If you got something positive out of this, again, please hit like. I can't underline enough how important that is in getting my work in front of more people who would enjoy seeing it and who would benefit from it as well. It's a massive help, and I do thank you for it. In the next video, we move on to the fun stuff. Sharp knives, noxious chemicals, and of course, the finished result. So I'll see you back in the bindery for that.